Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you all had a great week, and I hope you're ready for another portion of photography reviews. Now, today we're starting half an hour earlier, but I hope you don't mind. It will be same fun. And if you missed the beginning, you can always replay the video on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook group, as well as Facebook page. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England, and I'm also founder of the Clever Photographer. That's why we are here on the channel page and group. Now, if you've never been here, you may don't know, but what we do in this show every Monday at 5:30 or 6 p.m., we review your photos. And there is a system to it. The way we review your photos is we look at the technical part of the image. That's where we review the camera details. And we also look at the sharpness, exposure, and all of these things about your image and technical part of the image. After that, we look at the artistic part of the image. This is where we look at things like composition, we talk about the overall story, maybe the main subject, focal point, and so on. And after that, if we have a little bit of extra time left, then we look at the photo editing. I try to give you some tips and tricks. Now we are working in Luminar Neo mostly because our whole YouTube channel is about Luminar Neo and we offer lots of product for this photo editing software. However, if you use other software, lots of the stuff I'm doing during the photo editing and during the photography review show can be actually done in Lightroom or Photoshop or on one software. So anyway, looking into the comments, we have Tony from Essex. Tony, thank you very much for joining us as usual. Thank you for coming half an hour earlier. It's great to have you with us. I've seen some of your images again, and I have to say that I'm impressed again. Well done, Tony. I love them. It's really looking great, and I really like to see the progress you making. Zdeněk is with us as well from South Africa. Zdeněk, what part of winter are you in now? Is it like the coldest part, or you still have some time to go? And if there is still time to go with the winter, when you're gonna start to turn into spring? That would be interesting to know. This is why usually from Zdeněk we get wildlife captures and landscape captures. However, because of the weather and the conditions, now he's experimenting with macrophotography, product and object photography, and it's a lots of fun too. So that's a great idea for winter, wherever you are around the world. Obviously, you just challenge yourself and try different things, you know. Macro photography can be done at home. You don't necessarily need a sunset and beautiful animals outside. It's just there is always something to photograph. For example, me, when it's winter, what I like to do, I like to visit cathedrals, churches, and old buildings and just take pictures inside there. I really enjoy that. I am collecting pictures of ceilings of cathedrals and churches and preparing a book about it. So, you know, it just really depends on what you enjoy. And as long as you enjoy photography, there is always something to shoot and capture. So that was Zdeněk. Now looking at Miko all the way from Finland. Miko, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you over. I hope you're going to enjoy the photography review show. How is the weather in Finland? I guess you will have a summer or sort of summer. Here in England, we read in our mobile phones all about the heat wave in Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Greece. And in the meantime, this morning was 18 degrees and it was raining and it was super windy. Over the weekend, some of the events got even canceled because of the wind and because of the rain. So we definitely don't have a heat wave here in UK now. However, June was quite nice. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, I guess. Now, after that, Barry is here as well from Hertfordshire. Barry, I will open Google and actually have a look because I'm not 100% sure where it is. Let's have a look. Um, Hertfordshire. go? Let's have a look. So we talking north of London, if I'm right. That looks very nice too. There is a really nice church right on the picture. Actually, you know what? Let me share it with you. Let me drag it over to the screen. So the first picture I'm looking at is probably from drone. Is it somewhere where you live, Barry, or is it maybe somewhere around? That looks quite nice. Where I am based, I live in Chichester, which is here in West Sussex, and we also have a really nice cathedral. I photographed it a lot, some other interesting structures, and I'm really a big fan of photographing villages and cityscape, and these kind of villages can really offer a lot as well. Miko, beautiful summer in Finland, 25 degrees. Also, then maybe I should move to Finland then, because here July, we not really there yet. But anyway, let's move out of the messages and comments. But you, in the meantime, of course, keep sending them. It's great that we communicate with each other. I'm gonna make myself a little bit smaller. I will bring Luminar Neo up again. And before we really start, there's just quick announcement or a little bit of a news. If you do own Luminar Neo, they have announced last week a release of their Panorama stitching extension. So if you do own the application, and if you play around with panorama photography, or if you are seasoned panorama photographer, this panorama stitching extension is actually looking great. I had a chance to test it on their beta version, and out of all the extensions they released for Luminar Neo, I think the HDR merge and panorama stitching are the two that people will probably use the most. They are, I think, really handy, and they really make lots of sense for us landscape photographers, cityscape photographers, and so on. The panorama stitching will arrive this week on Thursday, on 20th of July. And as I say, I think definitely it's something to consider if you do edit in Luminar Neo and take this type of photography. So moving on and starting with the reviews. By the way, if you want to join us with your own photos, all you need to do is to join our membership. And to do that, you just need to head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/membership, where you're going to pay a little monthly fee. And of course, you will not get just the review show. You will get access to the review show. You will get access to our Clever Photographer Academy Facebook group. But most importantly, you will get a monthly bundle of digital tools for photographers. It's always bundled in a theme. So for example, in July, it was a summer portrait photography. And with that, you get things like skies, custom brushes, overlays, textures, presets for Lightroom and Luminar Neo, sometimes backgrounds, sometimes Lightroom brushes. It really depends, but usually it's around 200-300 elements, and I really think that is super worth it. And if you want to find out more about it, one more time, head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/membership. All of that is out of the way. And we can start by looking at landscape photographers. So the first two images are from David. So let's jump straight to it and look at them. The first one is like really kind of minimalistic seascape, which is actually really nice. Talking about panorama, this is really very panoramatic crop right here with a little lighthouse on these rocks and more rocks. Really nice sky as well with the light. It's just looking quite nice. I really like how it's minimalistic, minimal colors as well. Nice texture with the sun rays. It all looks very powerful. Now, looking at the camera details, this was captured with Sony 7 Mark II. The lens was 28 to 70 millimeters. And from the camera settings, David captured with ISO 200, 55 millimeters, f11, and 1/500th of a second. So video ISO, as we always say, the golden goal, and especially for landscape photography, is ISO 100. This is where you minimize the possibility of adding extra digital noise to your images. The higher the ISO, more noise in the image, to the point when you get to thousands on your ISO, and that's where you start to lose sharpness, textures, details, and the image eventually basically is unusable. However, ISO 200 is more than good enough. So well done there. 55 millimeters. It's still nice wide shot. However, I would assume that you did fair bit of cropping here. F11, yeah, I usually suggest for landscape photography when you start to stick between f7.1 and f11. F7.1 is generally the number where the lens perform at its best. You get the most sharpness all the way to the edges, and the picture is or should be crystal clear. F11 is also great. I use f11 when I have objects closer to the camera or when there is lots happening, when there is a kind of bigger depth. So I have quite strong foreground, strong middle ground, and background, and I really want to make sure that everything is in focus. Especially when you go wide, when you're using wide lens, anything between f7.1 and f11 will be sharp anyway. So those are the numbers I try to stick to as a landscape photographer. Now, 1/500th of a second, looking at the sky, everything looks good to me. The exposure looks good, so everything looks good. Now, when we zoom in a little bit, let's double check for the noise. But actually, there isn't noise at all. So well done on that. Looking around, there is maybe slight touch of chromatic aberration, but maybe it's just a color, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now, looking at the rocks themselves, they are a little bit, they almost start to look like painterly, like when you paint them with a brush. So the sharpness is down a little bit, but that's probably the distance and the size of the image. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, especially when you zoom out, you can't really see it anyway. So that's about it for the technical part. I wouldn't do much stuff differently. I think it's quite nicely captured. Now, talking about composition and the artistic part of the image, I really like this panoramatic view. I think it works very well specifically for this minimalistic composition. Obviously, we have a very dramatic sky, nicely captured with the texture in it. Then we have the sea, but both of them, there is not really much happening. So the main subject and the first thing people will look at is the contrast to it, and that's those rocks. And as they are quite flat anyway, that's where I think the panorama crop really makes sense, because you don't want to keep adding extra spaces which they don't really have any meaning for the composition. Plus, I think that this horizon in the middle of the image can work really well, especially when there is a reflection. So I think it's very well done. I really, really like it. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a shame that we don't have more of the sun there, because it does look a little bit like they're cut off the rays. So the sun is there and human can imagine it, but I just wish we could see the sun. That would be so cool. But still, in overall, it's a lovely image and it's well done. Now, moving on for this image, this is a lovely, lovely capture, lovely colors, nice warmth, the boat coming in, creating nice movement and depth. I think it's really nicely done. Again, this kind of panoramatic crop. On this one, I think we have just a little bit too much of the sky here, specifically because there is not really much texture in it anyway, but still, it's very, very lovely. So looking at the camera settings here, again, a Sony A7 Mark II, 28-70 on the lens. And from the camera settings, so ISO 100, well done there, 28 millimeters, so really wide shot here, f11, we still good, and 1/250th of a second, making sure again that we have a good exposure. Now, zooming in, looking around, the sharpness is quite good, considering that we are looking at kind of smaller image for panorama. I think it's looking all good. Good. I don't really see anything. I think the sharpness is good. I think the exposure is good. The glow is nice coming from this side. So in overall, technically, I think is very well done. Now, talking about composition, I already mentioned, and that brings me back to the first picture where I was saying that you try to avoid spaces which don't necessarily add anything to the composition. And I think in this case, it's the sky. I think there's just way too much of it. Now, I know that you need to balance it somehow, but you just look at it, and if you would print it, there would be just lots of empty space. So one way to do it is basically to crop it away even further. I know that then we're getting into really like a strong panorama, but anyway, we still can do it, isn't it? It's a digital photography. We can really try. So when I would do it, I would probably go let's say as far as here. And when I hit enter, you get this super strong panorama, but you're adding so much more impact on the boat, on the town, on the glow, on the bridge, and everything. It's just suddenly the eyes are not wandering around all of this space. They are just focusing on what's important, and that's a little bit of the warm golden hour sky in a combination with the boat, with the sea. I think it's beautiful scene. We have the leading line coming through under the bridge. We have the boat helping us with the depth, so almost working as your like a foreground, the middle ground and background. Um, I think the scale also helps us. The boat helps us with the scale, kind of really making us aware what are the different sizes on the picture. So in overall, this is great, and actually it ends up being a really really lovely panorama. So well done there. A really nice picture, very well done. Except the cropping, I wouldn't adjust anything on it. So in overall, a really good job, David. Thank you so much for sending your images over. It was my pleasure to review them for you, and I hope you're gonna send us more images in future. Which brings us nicely to Deepak. Now, Deepak sent us pictures last week, and I was basically telling him that I was asking him to avoid using frames and watermarks for the photography review show, simply out of the fact that that way I really just focus on the image. I'm not distracted by other things. So that's what happened. We got his images back. Now, I already talked about this image last week, so let's just quickly show you the image from last week, if I can find it. Yeah, it was here. So I was talking about this watermark here. And as you can see, it has a lot of clarity and details on it. Now, when we have a look at the image he sent us today, I like this much more, Deepak. This is much more natural, much more balanced. Also, everything looks just a little bit cleaner. There is not that really heavy contrast, so it just works really really well. So I really like what you've done with the image. I think it's looking great. I already mentioned last week that I think it's very well done. I think the photographers in this case really help with the overall composition. They help us acting as a foreground, they help us with the scale sense, and they help us with the depth. So we have the photographers, then we have the middle ground here with the mountains, and then we have the background with the mountains and the sky. What I think also works really well here is the kind of typical color wheel use of colors. So you have the foreground or the front part of the image represented with the warm colors, and then we have the background and the back of the image represented with the cool or cold colors. So I think that also works really well. So in overall, Deepak, well done. I love this image. I think it's really well done, and I love what you've done to it in this edit. I think it looks even better than last week. Now, this is an image I haven't seen, so let's have a look at it. Let's talk about the camera details first. So this is the Canon R6 with a 24 to 105 millimeters on lens. From the camera settings, ISO 100, 43 millimeters, f9, 1/500 of a second. Now, as a camera setting goes, it's a spot on. ISO 100, definitely the way to go. Either you put your camera on a tripod or you handheld it. 43 millimeters is good wide, view, which obviously maybe this is panorama when you stitch image together or you cropped it. Either way, I think it works very well. F9 is a great number as well. Again, making sure you have sharpness all the way through the image. And 1/500 of a second clearly give you really nice details and texture in the sky, and it avoids any overexposed areas. So on this image, the camera settings, spot on. Now, moving to the composition itself. It's an interesting capture. I think it's quite nicely put together. I think it's quite nicely balanced. You have quite nicely balanced the rocks and mountains here. The sky, I think, works really nicely too. There is lots of texture in it. It adds a drama. However, first come first, when I zoom in, I can see fair bit of noise in the sky. So that's something you could try to avoid by applying a little bit more of noise reduction. That would be the first thing I would do. And second, I think if you wouldn't see the image before and uh, it would be a first time I would show it to you, you wouldn't actually be able to say what exactly is it we are looking at here. Now, this could be 100 meters tall mountain, which is really difficult to climb on, or this could be also just a meter. So what it's actually missing is something that can give us a sense of scale. So something, I don't know, a tree, a person, whatever the human eyes is able to recognize and compare with the rest of the scene. So I know it's not there, so it's not a big deal. However, as a tip for future, it would be something I would try to look for, just to kind of put it together and just to put it together and basically make the composition even stronger. But in overall, I think it's really nice. Again, similar use of the colors like in the previous image, the warmth at the front, the sky at the back. Now, maybe I would crop it differently with the sky. I like to use the rule of third for my sky. So when the sky is my main subject, I do use 2/3 of a sky, 1/3 of a ground. When it's the other way around, the land is my main subject, then I use 1/3 of a land and 2/3 of a sky. So that would be something I would try to do. But in general, I think it's really lovely and I wouldn't do much with it. Maybe in post processing, I would close the image and navigate the human eyes even a little bit further. Initially, we were talking about noise reduction on the sky. So, for example, we could just apply a little bit more luminosity noise reduction. Generally, can sky works quite well on noise reduction because it's a cloud. So if it's a little bit glowy and soft, it doesn't really matter. So I think that's good. In most of the applications, you can apply noise reduction locally. So if you would lose lots of texture on your rocks, you could basically just apply the effect to your sky, so you could just brush very quickly over the sky, and that way you would be removing noise just from the sky itself. So that was the noise. And then I was saying that I would close it even further. And what I mean by that I would just apply a little bit of minus exposure and use the linear gradient from the bottom. So something like this, and just close it a little bit here. So that way more focus go on the center of the image. So that's about it. Now I talk a lot, Deepak. I'm sorry. I will have to move on. However, just very quickly about this image. It's lovely capture, obviously, with lots of texture on it. Quite nice diffuse light. Now, when I compare it with your epic landscape, obviously, it's a kind of different photo. First thing, when I look at it, I think it would be difficult for me to recognize what is the main subject and what is it you're trying to show me. Is there some fish, or is it this main rock, or is it the water? So I think that's one thing. And second, yeah, it's just, I could go through the technical part and I could go through the composition, but I think we done a lot of that on your landscape pictures. So let's keep an eye on them. And in this case, there's nothing really wrong with your camera settings here. Nothing wrong with the composition. It's just one thing I would work on is look at it or try to put it in front of somebody and tell him what you're trying to show. What you're trying to show him, what is it you're trying to display? Because here it's just a little bit difficult to say. Now we need to move on, and we're gonna do that by moving to Zdeněk's pictures. Now let's quickly have a look at the comments. Barry is saying that there is a lots of churches around him. He lives in town called where? Okay, so where in? I will look at that later. We will run out of time soon. So thank you anyway for that. Thank you for sharing that with us. And now we're gonna move into macrophotography with Zdeněk. Now, Zdeněk, what are we looking here? So this is a desert rose right here. As far as I know, created by Focus Stacking. So that's nicely done. There's a little bit of softness here. Now, I don't know with F11 if that was meant to be the point. However, it's a lovely capture. I like the texture. And maybe in a comment, Zdeněk, you can let us know what is it exactly we are looking at. But I will come back to it. In the meantime, let's have a look at this picture right here as well and start from here. Now, Zdeněk, this was with your Canon 77D with your 85mm lens, and from your camera settings, ISO 100, 85mm, obviously on the prime lens, f8, and 1 second exposure. 1 second exposure. That's a long exposure. So was it home maybe in studio, or this is why 1 second of the exposure, but still, yeah, ISO 100 is good. 85mm, obviously, with this kind of prime long lens, that's how it is. F8 giving us most of the sharpness. I wonder if you captured this with focus stacking or no, but either way, looking at it, first I see some, I'm assuming this is maybe from noise reduction. You see a little bit of artifacts. Now, this is something I've seen a lot lately on images. It seems like some of the noise reduction tools actually create white dots when they overdo it. When you remove lots of noise on certain textures, they start to leave white dots behind them, and I can see them here. I don't know if that's exactly the case in your case, but you can see these little white dots. I don't know if you see it on your screens, but you can see them a little bit around here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this is where I think maybe you need to be a little bit careful with the sliders. And this is where maybe if it was a darker scene, what I would do, I would maybe use little higher ISO for this type of photography and just go with the shutter speed a little bit lower. So maybe just try to avoid noise that way. So I think the artifacts here, they are a little bit distracting, but the rest of it looks quite good. I think the sharpness is kind of all the way. It's a very interesting subject with lots of interesting texture, also interesting shape, and look, talking about composition itself. I think I would maybe go for a little bit different framing, but this is very much subject decision rather than something that you have to do. I would probably focus really just on the picture itself, maybe even try to go a little bit more above the flower, pointing down. But still, the framing isn't bad. I like how you have managed to keep some parts on either side. Let's just quickly jump into edit and crop it so it's in the center. So I think that's quite cool. So while we're here, let's see if we can maybe just adjust a little bit of the saturation. So let's have a look. Maybe just somewhere around here, maybe just -6. That would work well for me. And I'm sure you already applied some vignette, but it's not necessarily the vignette. I would just like to add a little bit more glow in the center of the flower, something like this, just to add a little bit more light and a little bit more vignette around the image. Now, quickly looking at the notes, since I asked Zdeněk a few questions. My pictures are experiment with extension tubes, 68 millimeters, and stacking 4 pictures. Okay, well, that's cool. So this is 4 pictures stacking with 68 millimeter extension tube. Very, very cool. And just quickly, Zdeněk, if you can write if you have applied some noise reduction and which application, extension, or software did you use. That would be great if you could share this with us. But anyway, looking at the image, this is what I would do. I think in overall, it looks good. I think it's a little bit oversaturated, so just a little bit down so your eyes don't hurt. And for the noise reduction or the sharpening, extra sharpening, just a little bit less on the sliders. Which brings us to your second image right here. So this is the desert rose. Now for me, with my unknown eyes, since I don't know exactly what it is, it looks like a shape created out of sand, but maybe it's a flower. I'm not 100% sure what is it exactly we are looking at. Desert rose. Let me have a look. Can't find it, but that's okay. So basically, zoomed in, as Zdeněk mentioned in the comments, with the 68 millimeter tube. This is where I think the second image he sent us comes handy. As you can see, the size of the picture. So basically, if we look at this, and I'm assuming this maybe are millimeters, then we are somewhere on 30 millimeters, so 3 centimeters on the size. When we then look at the actual image, then it's this big. So very well done. Now, Zdeněk, just from quickly from the technical point of view, ISO 100, yes, 85 millimeters, f11 and 0.5 second, all good there. It's more looking at the image itself. I think there is still slight softness here. And again, I'm just not sure if that was the goal or if you just need to continue practicing the technique. So there is a little bit of so there is a little bit of softness on this part and also on the edge here. Other than that, the sharpness is good all the way. I quite like the light. I think it creates really nice shadows. I would maybe diffuse it even a little bit more if it would be possible. Also, I'm not exactly sure what light you're using, but it seems a little bit too cold for me. But this is just judging by looking at the image itself. Also, I think one more thing is the background itself. I think the background, ideally, you would choose different color or something else if it would be possible, because like this, the image really blend together. So I wish it would have maybe it would be darker or maybe it would have a different color just to really separate the subject from its background. That's about it on this one. From the composition, it's interesting. It's a really tight crop, and as Zdeněk mentioned, it's something that was created by wind in desert. That's why the background. So I guess you can't do much, but it's still interesting. So, so you are in the desert capturing with 68 millimeters tube. Well done. That's a challenge right there for you. Well done on that. So yeah, interesting picture. Very well done. Few things here and there. On the first one, I think it's just the noise reduction. On the second one, yeah, a little bit of the sharpness here and maybe just a little bit more diffused light. Maybe try to position it differently. But if this is indeed natural light, then that's how it is. So thank you very much. Thank you for sending the images over. It's really interesting to see it. I think lately video images, maybe you need to send me a message before the video, so then I kind of know what I'm looking at, because you're trying different techniques and it's not always obvious when I look at the images to start with. So if I would know, I would maybe just look at them from different point of view. But keep trying, Zdeněk. Well done. Moving to Stefan. Stefan, 3 images from you, as far as I remember. Now, this one is called The Ghost. So thank you very much for that. It's very artistic, very creative, but I will not be able to tell you much more on that. It's a lovely ideas, trying to do something a little bit different with the light, with the blur, and with the motion. It's cool, but we will continue looking at the other images. So starting with the lens ball right here. Now, looking at it, this was captured by Canon 5D Mark IV with the camera settings. No, first with the lens 24 to 70 millimeters, and then with the camera settings ISO 200, 70 millimeters, f8, 8 second. 8 second. Wow. ISO 200, yeah, I mean, it's a dark composition. You can see a low light scene, 70 millimeters. So nicely zoomed in. F8, again, depending what effect you were trying to create. Maybe you were going for the long exposure, so I understand that. 8 second, which make me think that maybe you were creating these little light streak and light painting around. So, Stefan, that's lovely. Very nice capture, actually. It's very, very interesting. It's very creative as well, just like the first picture. And I think it looks quite cool. Now, when it comes to composition, I'm going to be super picky, but don't take it personally at all. I just think that when you do the work and you create something like this, it's just such a shame that the glass is scratched, because it's not scratched like, when I look at it, it doesn't look like, oh, it was meant to be scratched because it was meant to be vintage. It looks scratched like it's just scratched here and there. So I think it's just a little bit of a shame personally. But so there's an opportunity to try improve for next time. But I think it looks really, really cool. Now for the composition itself, I think the cropping could be a little bit different. I think I would probably go tighter on the other side as well, just to get kind of similar idea here. And I would probably crop a little bit of this side. So by doing that, first we get a balance of the composition. We get a similar amount of space on the top and on the bottom. Then by cropping it on this side, we are actually positioning both of these balls on the thirds here, which naturally attract human eyes, and it works usually quite well. And also it creates a really nice flow because it looks like the light is coming from here, and it really nicely leads towards the balls themselves. So in overall, this is really lovely, very creative. I really like that. So thank you very much, Stefan, for sharing it with us. And thank you for going all the way through to try to create something like this. After that, we are looking at something a little bit more classy. And I have to say, this is definitely one of the better macro or flower captures with the black backgrounds I've seen recently. I think this is actually really nicely done. It works nicely together. It's nicely blended together. The combination of these dark color or the black with the purple always works really, really well. And it's a lovely capture, Stefan. I really think that this is very well done. It was again captured with the Canon 5D Mark IV with the lens 24 to 70 millimeters. And from the camera settings, this time we are on 400 with our ISO, 70 millimeters, again, kind of punched in, f6.7 and 1/60th of a second. So camera settings, spot on there. Nothing to add. The light is quite nice. It's diffused, but not completely. So it gives us a little bit of nice contrast around. It paints around and creates really, really nice shape. So I think that works really nicely. You can see how we get the highlights on this side and then a little bit of a shadows here. Similarly, highlights down here and shadows there. So I think all of this just works really, really nicely. So well done there. Well done for the technical part of the image. For the composition itself, I think it works nicely too. Now, I think that we have a little bit of too much space here. I think it's not necessarily needed, but I understand you need to crop it somehow. If anything, I would probably center the flower a little bit more. And so for that, let's just quickly jump into cropping. So what basically I would do, and this would maybe have to be done in Photoshop, but what I would try to do is just to basically get reduce of this empty space here. I think it's a little bit distracting. You want to really focus on the flower and look at it like this. Now, from this point of view, I would definitely think that this is ready to be printed. I think it's really nicely done. Now, maybe just keep an eye on little details like here, there is a little bit of leak. And when you take the extra time and create something like this, you may really want to finish it off and pay attention even to details like this. But Stefan, it's a lovely, lovely picture. Thank you very much for sending it over. Thank you for sending over all three of your images. It was a pleasure to review them. And until next time, thank you very much. Which brings us nicely to Tony. Tony, it's your turn and your time to shine. So we have three flowers, and then we have this black and white lonely tree. Well, it's not that lonely, but it's a lovely capture. So, Tony, I love the images again. Definitely starting to see that you have a good eye on for a composition and good eye for main subject and a contrast, because it really works very well. Let me just go back to last week when again I was commenting on your composition here. This one I really loved. I remember where I really felt that this one flower really putting everything off worked very well. And the other ones as well, this one with the bag, I think worked really well too. So coming back to this part, this one is great. Great framing, great composition, lovely contrast. It's really simple, but it works. Sometimes I feel that with macro and flower photography, we're just trying to do too much. And really, to start with, it's really simple. Us as a photographers, we trying to overthink it. If you would take this image and show it, for example, to my sister or my mom, they would love it. And they would want to put it as a background for their computer and a phone. And they would really like it because it's colorful, saturated, it has a texture, it has everything right, the composition is balanced, it's centered, and it just really works. So really nicely captured there. This one, another story. Simple composition. You have the green, darker background, and in the middle of it, you have just a really nice flower, really nice contrast of the colors, the selection of the colors, the white balance, the saturation works really well. And when you look at it for a while, it almost start to look like a painting. So I think that works really well too. These days, these pastel colors, like on this flower, are really popular. It's something what works really well these days, and I think it's really nicely done too. So Tony, well done. Now looking at this image, it's also very nicely done, but this is where the rule of 1, 3, 5, 7 come in. Two are always a little bit odd when to look at, because it's just there's something about 2, 4, 8. It's just for some reason it's not as strong as when you use single subject or 3 subjects or so. But not a big deal. It's just something to consider. So finally, the fourth image is the tree itself. Now, I am a huge fan of lonely trees. It's something that if I see a lonely tree, I drive around it until I get the perfect shot of it. It's definitely something I do here around Chichester. There's lots of fields where there's lots of trees. So to say lonely tree needs to be really lonely. So I really like when lonely tree doesn't have a distraction of its surrounding and so on. So this is maybe something which I will kind of try to explain in a moment. Anyway, let's have a look at it. It's a Canon 50D camera with 18 to 135 millimeters. From your camera settings, we are looking at ISO 100, 42 millimeters, f11, and 1/125th second on a shutter speed. Camera settings, it's spot on. As always, ISO 100, f11 good, 1/125th of a second, everything great. So as it comes to camera settings, there is no problem. Zooming in, there's a little bit of noise or more texture, but I think for black and white photography, that can work really nicely together, adding grain and making it more like a vintage capture. So really nicely done. Well done there. Now, okay, so then talking about story, obviously we know that it's the tree itself. So that works really nicely. The dark tree on the background of the sky also works nicely, making the really nice, strong contrast. Now, things I would try to do differently for next time. So first thing I would, for example, try to do is to avoid this part here. So positioning myself more, now looking at the screen and looking at the thing, more towards left. So that way I would get maybe one string of trees behind it, and it would look a little bit more, it would be less distracting. Another thing you could do is to go lower with the camera, if it would be possible, and get more of the sky behind the tree. So I think these trees, basically, these trees, bushes, and everything are a little bit distracting, and they taking attention away from the tree itself. So I would either position myself around so I have more of the trees, so it's one whole piece of forest or woods behind it, or I would go lower, try to get more sky behind. Or I would really kind of walk around it in 360 degree and try to look for a space when there is maybe no trees behind it. Looking at it, I think what's more distracting from the main subject is this part here when the tree and bushes are close to the main subject. Whew. Then when it comes to framing itself, I think maybe there is just a little bit too much of the sky here, but that's not necessarily a problem. What I think I would do, I would try to center it even closer. So if I take your crop, I would probably go for something like this. Again, it's all about the tree in a contrast of the sky. And by doing that, you just create something like this. Here in Luminar Neo, there is a tool called Dramatic Tool, and I think that would work really well on this one. So when you do that, you just increase the amount, and it really creates really like an abandoned scene. It makes the sky a little bit more like dramatic, and it takes the subject and adds more texture and clarity. And I think that really works very well. And also with a little bit of extra vignette, focusing on the tree itself, it could, I think, work really nicely too. Now, maybe that was a little bit too much of the dramatic tool, but maybe just something like this. Tony, so this is for the tree picture, few tips and tricks. I have told you what I think about your flowers and how I think really well you're doing, especially when it comes to composition and finding the right contrast and the subject. So I think maybe for this week, that's it. Thank you very much for sending your pictures over. It's always great to see them. Now, if you have more pictures like this tree and maybe pictures you're not sure about, send them over because then we can talk about it and you can move forward even on subjects you're not so sure about. Moving on, we're gonna end up with Ken. Now, Ken, if he's watching, I have a special message for him when it comes to the Dropbox link where you can upload the pictures. When you go to the Facebook group, the Clever Photographer Academy, I always prepare the events for each of these live sessions. Now, when you are in the group and click on the event, the first link says upload your images here. And that's where you click and upload your images, just so you know where they are and you can upload your images nice and early. So if not, most of the time, me or one of the team try to put the link on Sunday as a reminder on a Facebook group. So that way you can always get access to the next episode. I think that Ken did send me a little note. So let's quickly have a look at it, what he had to say about his images. So Ken was saying that if it's going to load, maybe on my phone, Ken was saying that they are both blue herons and they were taken at the Sapsucker Woods on the campus of the Cornell University Laboratory of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. Okay, so blue herons. Let's have a look at them. Now, starting with this image here, with this really nice close-up. Now, you have to understand that Ken is capturing his images with the Nikon Coolpix P1000. So it has its limitation when it comes to noise and sharpness. However, so we are more focusing on the composition and the storytelling. Now, the camera details are not always correct neither on this camera. However, looking at it, ISO 320, which for wildlife isn't the end of the world, 503 millimeters on the lens, so really zoomed in, if it's right indeed, f8 and 1/500th of a second on the shutter speed. So from looking at it like this, I think for wildlife, it's fine. However, looking at the image itself, it's actually really nicely done. I really like the shape of the bird. I think that works very nicely. I like the contrast of the background. So you have the bird with the green background creating lovely, lovely contrast. The positioning and the framing, I think, works really well too here. So that's really nicely done. The colors are great as well. So everything, I think, works really nicely. There is a little bit of space above and on the side. Again, that works nicely too. So in overall, I think it's really, really well done, Ken. This is a lovely picture. The depth is really nice here as well with this almost bokeh-like background. So well done on that. So this is either a same bird or maybe his brother in environment. So as a photo shoot, this is a great example of a collection of pictures. This is something that we as a photographers can also really work on, to basically, when we photographing one subject, to take few pictures and share them together. I think that works really well. And in this case, it's a lovely example of it. Again, we have the bird nicely positioned, nicely applied to the composition, with the flowers at the same level, giving us a really nice sense of depth. Then you have this really nice softness at the back, which creates a really nice background for all of that. You can see the bee here, the colors, all of it works nicely together. You can immediately recognize the main subject. You know exactly what is the image about, and everything works nicely together. I think this is probably one of my favorite captures, Ken, from you for a long time now, is this image. I think everything works really well together on both of these images. So really well done on that there. Well done, great captures. Now, what are we on? 41 minutes. Okay, 49 minutes. So that's almost it for this week, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoy this. Now, what are we here in Europe? We are almost middle of July. There's fields starting to be really interesting to photograph. Birds are very nice as well here. Macro photography now with the early mornings when basically the animals and the insect is kind of slow and you can capture them. Night photography, like night sky, is really great as well to capture around. So these are some of the subjects you could be capturing right now. For me, what is the next thing I'm gonna photograph? I'm really focusing on the panorama right now. That's what I'm working with. We have a little mini series on panorama photography coming out on our YouTube channel at Clever Photographer. If you have a moment, make sure you check it out. Even if you know a lot about panorama photography, there are some interesting stuff about the history of panorama photography, how it was done, how it was created, and it's definitely something worth seeing. Folks, thank you very much. I really enjoy your images this week. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for sending them over, and I hope that I will see more of them next week. Don't forget that all the dates and upload links are already available on our Clever Photographer Academy group, as well as in the membership page itself. Folks, have a great evening. Thank you very much. Stay safe, and I will see you again in 7 days.